Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. Folks, welcome to you on this Wednesday evening, our 151st show as it happens tonight. And there's been a lot happening in the last 48 hours anyway, which we're going to talk about. We're going to start by talking about a fairly major event in British political history, and that was Reform UK's press conference yesterday in the Oxford airport, in a hangar at the Oxford airport, and it was promoting their deportation policy. So we're going to look at that and we're going to compare it to the quintessential perfect deportation policy, which is chapter 11 of Protect Our Country, our latest book, and we're going to see if it measures up in some way. Secondly, we're going to look at an opinion poll which was released a couple of days ago, which shows that immigration now in Scotland is the third most urgent issue for people after health and food and water, basically, i.e. living standards. And finally, we're going to look at the national newspaper, which has been running a series this week, which has been looking at why we need more immigration, right? Because that's the national newspaper's view on things. And we're going to be noting that it may actually be in opposition to an increasing number of their readers, actually. And we're going to be looking at the really generally poor arguments that they have for the subject, and actually a couple of arguments that do make good sense. Because, as they say, a broken clock can also be right some of the time. So, packed program as usual. Please do stick around, and please do retweet this if you're watching on Twitter, because that really helps the algorithm. And if you're watching on Facebook, please give us a share and please give us a like. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up. It all helps. It all helps to get the message out, folks. Now, let's look at this first event, which was yesterday. And this was Nigel Farage and Reform UK's announcement that they intend to deport at least 600,000 illegals in a 5-year period if they were to be elected. Now, of course, politics is something that moves constantly. And so in a couple of weeks' time, that may have gone up to 1 million and they may have changed elements of their policy and so on. So nothing that I'm going to say tonight is set in stone, because that's the thing with politics. It always moves, it always changes. However, they have come up with a policy on the matter, and good for them. Good for them, I have to say. That's very good for them. And interestingly enough, Keir Starmer has not criticised it. He hasn't come out and said, oh, that's disgraceful, trying to get rid of 600,000 people. Oh, terrible, terrible. We can't have that. No, he's just let it lie. He's just let it lie, which just shows you the movement of politics at the moment. So let's look into it a wee bit more. One thing I really liked was they were holding it in the aircraft hangar, and they had this deportation departures sign, which was basically saying that, flight 291 is now boarding back to Afghanistan, Eritrea, another one to Iran, to Syria, to Sudan, to Vietnam, to Somalia, to Yemen, to Iraq, to Turkey. Now, one thing that they didn't actually have there was the two main countries, or at least two countries from which you get a lot of so-called asylum seekers, and those are Pakistan and India. And if we look at the top 10 nationalities claiming asylum in the UK in the year ending June 2025, we see that it's mainly Pakistanis. Now, the dark purple there is for those who have arrived in an irregular manner. By that, they mean what we would call illegal, really, across the English Channel, stowaways here and there. The lighter purple is people who have come to the end of their legal visa, usually a work visa, maybe a study visa or a family visa. And rather than wanting to go all the way back to Pakistan, they simply claim asylum. Now, that's an absurd form of claiming, which simply should not be allowed, actually. But Pakistan is by far the biggest sender of so-called asylum seekers, followed by Afghanistan, Iran, Eritrea, Bangladesh, India down there, Sudan, Syria, Vietnam, and Somalia. Okay. Now, so they didn't list Pakistan and India here. That's me picking. I'm just like being pickety there, really, quite frankly. Maybe they didn't do it just for politically correct reasons. Maybe they didn't want to start too much of controversy. But anyway, they stepped in controversy, whether they liked it or not, with that. And they released a fairly meager, very brief policy document, which we'll just take a look at here. They called it Operation Restoring Justice, our plan to deport all illegal migrants. All, interesting, in the UK and secure our borders. Very good, very good, very good. For 3 decades, successive governments have promised to get tough, yet the estimated population of people with no lawful right to remain in the UK almost certainly stands above 1 million. Their continuing presence corrodes the rule of law, costs billions in accommodation and welfare costs, distorts low-wage markets, and signals to the world that Britain's borders are open. Very good. Very good. So they're proposing a 5-year emergency program intended to identify, detain, and deport illegal migrants in the UK and to deter any future build-up. This will, they say, quite rightly, save the taxpayer tens of billions over time. And they go on here to describe it in a little bit more detail. Upon winning a general election, a reform government under Nigel Farage will, and they've bigged up this here, leave the ECHR as like the #1 thing. Well, okay, that could happen, and it maybe does need to happen. I possibly would have buried that in the small print, quite frankly, because that leads to a whole debate getting diverted into the question of our personal human rights here in the United Kingdom, which sometimes might just be an argument that you don't actually need to get into. But anyway, they've come out straight, they've lanced the boil, they've said leave the ECHR and repeal the Human Rights Act and replace it with a British Bill of Rights. Could work if it's done well, and then pass the Illegal Migration Mass Deportation Bill, which will create a legal duty to remove illegal migrants. And it opens with a blunt obligation for the Home Secretary that, quote, the Secretary of State shall ensure the removal from the United Kingdom of each person who does not have extant leave to remain. Well, don't use the word extant because nobody knows what that is, okay? But anyway, extant leave to remain and is not an Irish citizen. See, why are they saying that for? Nobody's been talking about deporting Irish citizens, but that's just like thrown in there. Each person who does not have a leave to remain and is not an Irish citizen. Obviously, we're not deporting the Irish. Where did that come from? Oh, man. Okay. The following parts of the legislation are introduced on an emergency basis with an inbuilt sunset clause after 5 years. A sunset clause means that after 5 years, we'll look at it again. If we still like it, we'll add it. We'll continue it for another 5 years. Now, this I really like. That will be followed by disapplying the 1951 Refugee Convention. Now, this is something that we've argued for years now, that we have to leave the UN Refugee Convention. They're saying disapply it basically means the same thing. They've also added another couple of conventions there that they're going to disapply. I personally wouldn't have brought attention to that. I mean, because that's just asking for people for trouble. If you say you're going to disapply the UN Convention against torture, guess what the next question from the media is going to be? Are you going to send people to be tortured? Do you support torture? So on and so forth. So sometimes it's best just to deep six stuff like that. You don't need to shine the light on it. Anyway, the good thing is disapply the 1951 Refugee Convention. Derogation is justified. Obviously, it's justified. We're a sovereign nation, or at least we're meant to be, so we can derogate from anything at any time. Create detention power without Hardiel Singh constraints. Now, to be frank with you, I'm not entirely sure. Well, they explain it here. This means illegal migrants can be detained until they are deported. Ah, yes. Hardiel Singh probably put the Hardiel Singh law case probably put a constraint on how long you can deport somebody. Sorry, how long you can detain somebody prior to deportation. So they're just going to say that doesn't apply anymore. Good idea. An essential idea, in fact. As they say here, activist lawyers routinely use Hardiel Singh to secure their client's bail, after which the client absconds. Indeed. And furthermore, if you came to the UK illegally, you are ineligible for asylum. Which is absolutely right. In our book, what we've done is we identified 3 routes which are to be considered illegal. And if you try to apply for asylum after having entered via those 3 illegal routes, then you're going to be detained. And I like this, the next 2 things: re-entering after deportation and destroying ID become criminal offences. That has to be done. You send somebody who's come in illegally, they cannot be allowed back in. And the way you deal with that is you take biometric details and you ensure that they cannot enter legally. And if they're discovered again in the country illegally, then, well, they need to be punished with prison time, which is the correct punishment for such behavior. And as they say here, there will be a lifetime re-entry ban for everyone deported. Fantastic. So good. We won't go through the whole thing, but the point is they've put a little bit of thought into that. It doesn't really it doesn't go into it in any great depth, not in the depth that we go into it in our book. One big country, but I would say that it's generally in accord with the principles that we have delineated, to use a big word, in our book, Protect Our Country: Policies to Stop Mass Immigration, available from Amazon. So good for Nigel Farage. He was in Edinburgh today, and he was announcing the a conservative MSP who has now gone over to reform. What's the word that I'm trying to get to there for that? An MSP called Graham Simpson, a conservative MSP, and he's defected, who has defected to reform. Graham Simpson actually has always been pretty based. Back in the 2016 referendum on Brexit, Graham Simpson was one of only 2 Tory MSPs who supported leaving the EU. So Nigel was up today announcing that defection, and I actually watched the entire press conference, and it was all very interesting. Nigel was asked, though, he was asked, what about the women and children? And that kind of caught him off guard. We've covered the whole concept of women and children here, women and children to be put into secure hotels, but also deported. He didn't answer that one particularly well. He said that it gave the impression that they wouldn't be deporting women and children during this 5-year period, which was just on the hoof, which he shouldn't have had to do. It should be very clear what your position is on men, women, children, elderly, and other people who might be frail in some way. And our position is that you send the men who are competent to either prison or secure detention camps, which are effectively prisons, and the women and children go to secure hotels, which are effectively detaining them until such time as the family goes back. And if in any time in between they want to go back voluntarily, then we can help them do that through subsidizing their transport back. It can all be done very fairly and very humanely. And we do develop the whole idea in our book, Protect Our Country, a big book for the Union. Policies to Stop Mass Immigration. Let's have a look at some of your comments, folks. Derek says, good evening, Alistair. I see migration getting worse and the SNP farce. Get them out. Hi to Debbie. Hope you're well. Good evening, everybody, says Debbie. Hi to Oksana and to Catherine. Christopher says, is there a problem with the camera? If there is, please tell me. Ask my producer if there's a problem. My producer coming back to me here doesn't find an issue. Okay. Catherine says, there were some terrible questions from reporters. Indeed, there were. There were some ridiculous questions, but there was also some good questions which allowed Farage to sort of develop his point. Catherine says it's okay on Facebook. Hi to Dominic. Jefferson pipes in with there'll always be an England, and England shall be free if England means as much to you as England means to me. And everything's okay on YouTube. I haven't sung on the program for a long while. I need to get back into doing that. Or maybe I don't. So yeah, good to see the debate shifting, because 2 Saturdays from now, not this Saturday, but Saturday, the 6th of September, we are calling for people to rally outside the Scottish Parliament for our Enough is Enough rally. And we're calling it outside the Scottish Parliament because that's where the centre of power in Scotland lies, among those 129 MSPs. And we're going to be pointing out that we want them to start talking about the levels of what we regard as unsustainable mass immigration into the country, as well as all this fraudulent asylum seeking which is going on. You know, if you believe in a country, you have to believe that it has borders. If you believe in borders, you have to ensure that they can at least be properly policed. We want to know who's coming in, and we want to know how many are coming in, and we want to make decisions on who and how many come in. And it's just called being a normal country. If you don't believe in that, then you're just an internationalist who wants open borders, who says, come all, come one, come all, and let's just see where everything lies at the end of the day after that. So if you actually believe that Scotland and Britain are coherent nations, then you have to believe in our borders and you have to be wanting to control them. And that's what we're going to be, one of the messages which we're going to be saying. And we're going to be identifying the politicians. It's the politicians who are to blame at the end of the day. They are the people who create the circumstances in which we live. They are the ones who create the laws under which we all have to live. And some people will say, oh, Alistair, the Scottish Parliament isn't able to control immigration. Well, it can certainly talk about it. My goodness me, it likes to talk about everything else in the world. It can certainly start talking about immigration. And ultimately, what we want to do is to normalize the immigration restriction conversation. And we want to make it a key part of next year's Scottish Holyrood elections, which will be on 7th of May 2026. And we want to get people into the Scottish Parliament who will raise these issues. And there's plenty of ways and plenty of things that they can do. And we devoted an entire chapter in this book as to what Holyrood MSPs can do. Protect Our Country, available on Amazon. And we do push it because it's one of the ways that we keep this show on the road, folks. Now, that's going to be Saturday, the 6th of September at 12 for a 12:30 start. We've got quite a few speakers lined up now, some really interesting ones. It's going to be on the immigration issue, so we're not really going to be talking so much about the union, but obviously that's going to be part of it. But it's really going to be about normalizing the immigration restriction conversation. And we're going to some people from smaller political parties there as well, talking about what they believe in. And we've even got somebody from a Scottish nationalist political party who's going to be speaking, albeit not the SNP and not the Greens, but somebody from a smaller political party, which is Scottish nationalists. So they're going to be speaking as well. And their comments are going to be addressed to any Scottish nationalists in the room, as it were, to say this is everybody's issue. If you believe in Scotland, if you want the best for Scotland, whoever you are and whatever your possible political affiliations are, you should be looking to see how best to control the numbers that are coming in. So please do make a date for that. We've got this here, Enough is Enough rally outside Holyrood. Good. Well, we'll see you. We'll see you there, folks. We'll definitely see you there. That's not this Saturday, but the Saturday after. Please spread that around. Please share this broadcast. Please repost it. Share it on Facebook. Let's get the message out there. Good. Now, it seems to be quite timely that we've decided to hold this rally, because there was a opinion poll which was held about a couple of days ago, it was advertised, and we've got somebody sent us a copy of it. It was in the Scotsman, I think, and it was also in the Sun. Let's just put up the... There it is, the Sun on Tuesday, August the 25th. Migration fear triples in 2 years. More than 1 in 5 Scots list immigration as one of their top 3 concerns, polling has revealed. This is up from just 4% around 2 years ago and comes amid protests outside hotels housing asylum seekers. Healthcare, the economy, and the cost of living crisis remain our main priorities, according to research for the David Hume Institute and the DFLI partnership. Let me see if there's anything else worth reading in there. The Reform UK Scotland spokesman, Glasgow councillor Thomas Kerr, said, "This poll is no shock to those of us who live in Scotland's forgotten working class communities. People saw this coming for years, but until now, they've had no one to speak up for them." Fantastic. Good comment, that. Now, there's another picture here. Here we go. That lists proportion of population who rated immigration among top 3 biggest issues. If you go back to May 2023, that was just 4% of the Scottish population thought that was an issue. And that's probably just me and my 3 mates, basically. That's probably us in there. And then a few months later, it went up, crawled up to 7%. November 2023, it crawled up to 8%. And then in the last 18 months, it's really taken off. And that is simply reflected in what we, certainly in the big cities, see around us. February 2025, it shot up to 15%. May this year, it was 16%, and it's now sitting at 21%. That's almost 1 in 4 people who think that it is an important issue under the NHS and the cost of living and inflation. Okay, so that's a very interesting and important fact, and it means that those of us who are campaigning on this issue are able to legitimize our action by pointing to scientific data, as it were. Christopher says, hasn't the Home Office just admitted that it has lost track of 150,000 migrants, and how many more? Funny you should say that, Christopher. Labour has lost track of 150,000 migrant workers. Now, this appeared in the Daily Telegraph of the 11th of August. And to be fair, it's a little bit of an unfair headline, because it's not so much Labour having lost track, it's that the Conservatives in their last 14 years of government didn't bother to set up a system which would enable people on care work visas to be properly tracked. And so Labour are now at the stage, they've inherited this shambles, omni-shambles from the Tories. And so they don't know how many of these care workers who came in have left the country. They don't know how many of these care workers have even switched visa to another kind of visa who might still be in the country, or indeed how many of them have since claimed asylum. And it's not difficult to track people. You know, we've all got a national insurance number that follows us basically from birth around our schools, around our workplaces, to around our taxis, all these sorts of things. We're all tracked. So why can't the people who are coming into the country be tracked? by simply giving them a visa number, which follows them from job to job, which follows them when they change visas, which follows them when they leave the country. I mean, we live in a world now of AI. It's extremely easy for those who know how that thing works to create systems which will track people. And to be fair, I think the Labour people are trying to get a grip on this, but it must be a huge effort. But I think they are trying to get a grip on it, and to give them credit, they are attempting to stop it says here that care homes are now banned from recruiting staff from abroad. I know that Labour are trying to do that anyway. Whether that's actually come through now and whether that is actually part of the system, I don't know. But certainly Labour have been, that's a Labour policy to get that through and get that working somehow, which is a massive shift from the Boris wave, which again was just the come one, come all attitude on things. Hello to Rafa. Hope you're well tonight. Alan says, hope you get a huge turnout. Well, I think that is going to be a good one. I think it's going to be a good one. And Anthony, one of our most important activists, hope you're well tonight. Anthony says he's had over 20,000 hits on the posts that he's been doing to try to publicize the event. So thank you for that, Anthony. Rafa says, did anyone see on social media that a 14-year-old girl from Dundee was arrested for protecting her sister against what appears to be some kind of immigrants? Yes, we did see that. It was disturbing. There seems to have been some altercation between this girl and her friend. I'm not sure the relationship, but she was so concerned, she was so frightened that she was actually carrying an axe and a knife in her tracksuit trousers, which she prominently displayed to the world, and it's become a kind of meme which has gone viral. People are calling her the new Queen of Scots. And well, she got arrested, unfortunately, in some ways, and we can only hope that things get sorted out for her. We put out this tweet yesterday. Scottish Justice Minister Angela Constance, please can you keep this incident on your radar and ensure that this girl gets the help and protection that she needs, because she's clearly been pushed to a serious situation here. Now, this is the report in the Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 25th of August, saying a 14-year-old girl has been charged after allegedly being caught with a bladed weapon. Several police cars were sent to the scene around 7:40 on Saturday. And it says here, she will be reported to the relevant authorities. Well, I hope the relevant authorities look into whatever that situation was and that they properly do take the necessary action to protect her from the man or men that she was clearly in fear of. And sometimes it takes videos like that to bring it home, just what the serious situation that we're talking about here. And all these people who go, oh, what about the poor people that we're going to send back into the so-called land of wherever they claim to be persecuted? Well, what about the persecution of us? And I thought Matthew Goodwin wrote a very good comment on Twitter yesterday, which we'll just read out here. It says, Matthew here is reporting on the deportation press conference, and he says the questions Nigel Farage is being asked by much of the mainstream media are unbelievable. The key question is not how do we ensure unvetted illegal migrants are not tortured if they return. The question is how do we ensure that another 12-year-old schoolgirl in Nuneaton is not kidnapped and raped. Another 12-year-old in Birmingham is similarly not sexually raped. How do we ensure that another 10-year-old girl in Stockport is not very nearly kidnapped by an asylum seeker from Sudan, or another schoolgirl in Epping is not sexually assaulted, or that another aspiring Marine like Thomas Roberts is not brutally murdered in Bournemouth, or another pensioner like Terence Carney is not murdered in Hartlepool. I could go on, he says. Millions of people in this country, including myself, have simply had enough of tolerating people who do not tolerate us. Wow, very good. And he's got 106,000 views on that and almost 7,000 likes. Okay. Good point. Good point. And you know what? The people who make excuses for all of this, I think they're all employed by the national newspaper. And oh my goodness me, I've been buying it each day this week so that you don't have to. And I've been looking at it and reading their arguments for mass immigration and mass asylum seeking, because if there's a wrong side of an opinion, then very often the National will be very keen to ride that particular puddle. And where do I begin on all of that? Well, let's begin with just like the kind of old fossils, basically. You know, I don't want to call Kenny McCaskill that, but he's clearly a man who, again, as I say, they're still all just living in their 1970s, 1980s student union days when the world was a completely different place. He's trying to make a case here for Britain taking refugees, and he points out that Karl Marx was a refugee. Okay, so there you go. What a fantastic argument for refugees. And then he complains that the franchise for working class males didn't come until after the Great War. What that's got to do with anything, I'm not quite sure, but he had to get that out there. And then he points out that emergency measures were brought in during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and that he accepts here that during the miners' strike, policing largely remained by consent. So he's kind of all over the place with all of this. And I couldn't really get his main point out of it other than that if you don't want mass immigration, you're disgusting. You're disgusting. And increasingly illiberal. Blah, blah, blah. So there's really nothing of context there. There's the usual appeals to sentimentality and emotionalism rather than practicality. Hey, let's all just be nice. Let's all just sing Kumbaya and the world will go on merrily on its way. And as long as we can remember our shared humanity, then everything should be okay. Now, one or two things that these kind of people do point out, of course, is that we should always be directing our ire at the politicians, because the politicians are the people who make all of these problems happen. Often the rest of us are really just caught up in what's going on. This lady Shona Craven was in today's National. I read this article twice. I don't really know what her point is at all. I even, as you can see there, I even put black brackets around the areas that I thought were maybe our key points, but on rereading it, I don't get it. She's basically saying that reform thrives on insecurity, and they'll always stoke people's fears, according to her. But I mean, that's just a matter of opinion. That's not really anything you can grasp. Something you can grasp is this chap who told us that we should be rolling out the red carpet for immigrants. Now, these are all articles in the National this week. This one's on the 25th of August. That was on Monday. And the reason we should be rolling out the red carpet is because they are going to pay our pensions, according to him. Now, I know of this chap, and I know for a fact that he knows that that's probably bunkum, but he is saying that because I'm suggesting he's saying that because he has, for some reason, an ideological attraction to mass immigration. And he says here that he thinks it does change the country for the better, according to him. So he's an economist, and he's going to claim that we need it for pensions because we've got a falling birth rate. And it's true, we do have a falling birth rate, but we don't need immigration to fix it, because immigration will not fix it. And we dealt with all of this in this chapter, chapter 6, when we said that it's not necessary for the elderly, by which we mean it's not necessary ultimately for care homes, it's not necessary ultimately to pay our pensions. As we say, after all, such is the poor logic of such a claim that it ignores the fact that immigrants age too, and such a theory creates a vicious circle where more and more immigrants are going to be needed to care for and pay the pensions for more and more immigrants. Another example of supply creating demand in an endless loop, as we already looked at in chapter 4 of this book, Protect Our Country. And in this, we go into some depth about why this is not necessary, and we give suggestions that what we can do instead. And one of the things we can do is we can encourage the over 50s back into work. There's many over 50s who would love to get employed. We can be helping them to get back into work. We can be incentivizing family members to care for relatives at home rather than in care homes. We can be looking at ways to enable the elderly to be as independent for as long as possible in their own homes. We could try higher wages in the care sector. We could especially encourage a family-friendly tax and benefit regime, which will help families to have children, and families with children can find it easier for them. As we say here, we could try to encourage people to have more children and at least support those who do, instead of just importing people. This would require policies like serious tax breaks for families, making babies tax deductible. So the more you have, the less tax you pay. Increasing child benefit payments and encouraging parents, especially mothers, to be able to work from home where possible and necessary, and to be indeed compensated for child rearing to an extent. And we go further into it as well about why we must radically enhance the position of women with young children, to recognize the importance of nurturing and motherhood in our wider society. So it's like cultural shifts that we can do, instead of this, oh, let's just import hundreds of thousands of men from the Sudan or Eritrea. If it wasn't for if it wasn't for asylum, how many people would know that Eritrea was even a thing? And I also say here, pensions can be funded without immigration, and we look at some ways to do it. More about that in a moment. Especially, we should curb the immigration of dependents. So this is when somebody gets a work visa, they bring in their entire family, some of whom will be elderly and who will immediately start needing care and help. So if we curb immigration of dependents and we say you come in and work, but you can't bring in your extended family from Iran or wherever, you know, then that will also help. So there's plenty of things that can be done. And you can check them out in Protect Our Country, a big book for the Union. Search Amazon for that. Now, what I found interesting, though, was the letters that came back in response to that man's article. And one person here in the National, writing a letter, says, the problem is the low birth rate. The reason is the neoliberal way the country is run. The problem lies with the politicians and corporations. Migration is not the answer. It's a short-term fix that will produce the same long-term problem unless the present neoliberal model is dumped. Throwing more fuel on the fire just damps it down temporarily until it catches light and becomes a bigger fire. So that's somebody quite rightly pointing to the wider issues in society regarding the economy and the sort of the issues that brings. Obviously, we've all got different views on how that can be sorted, but at least that's helping us look in the right direction instead of just saying, let's have more and more people. Another person points out here about the world human population is going through the roof, and England's population is rising year on year as a result of mass immigration. World crises are totally out of control. Richard, you are advocating for a Ponzi scheme, and we know how they turn out. So that's people who read the National who are not anymore going to be putting up with that kind of nonsense. So at least that's good to see. And I have noticed among quite a few of these folk, they do highlight quite rightly the international financial system and the extent to which that can cause imbalances. They don't always have the correct solutions, in my view, but they at least point people to the bigger picture of what's going on there in a way that some of the advocates for mass immigration simply don't. This was an extremely interesting article that appeared on the same day. Our Indie Scotland pension system would be unique. Now, I'm aware of this group. They call themselves the Scottish Currency Group. I used to be interested in, I still am interested in monetary reform and the extent to which the international financial system works. And this appeared on the very same day as that article by the professor advocating more immigration, because there was no other way. No other way. We need men from Eritrea delivering whatever in order to pay the taxes, in order to fund the pensions. Complete nonsense. These people pointed out that if Scotland was independent, or indeed if Britain was a properly sovereign nation, then it can create its own money. It says here that our position is derived from the understanding that a state which issues its own currency is not constrained by any supposed shortage of it, and does not rely on taxation to finance public services and benefits such as pensions. And I know for a fact that the professor character there knows all of this. So quite a revolutionary article, which which is correct. But of course, I would like to see that as for all of Britain and not just for Scotland, because it works out better when it's for us all. So any other points here? Yeah, the other point, I mentioned there was a couple of good points that have come out of these articles. One of them is that we ought to be looking also at the bigger economic picture and seeing what countries are genuinely being severely disadvantaged by the way that the international financial system works. And the other thing, of course, is the endless wars that are driving refugees to our shores, and to try to avoid getting into those sorts of conflicts. Because if we look at this, okay, that's people coming from Afghanistan, which has been pretty much messed up by the West. People coming from Iran, where there's conflict. There's conflict in the Sudan. Syria has been destabilized by the West as well. And Somalia, there's constantly conflict in Somalia, which is made worse by various powers supplying various rebels with this, that, and the next thing. So we do have to be conscious as well of the extent to which war is driving these people to our shores. And in that regard, the extent to which Britain is implicated in those conflicts also. So this chap spoke about it. I challenged anti-asylum protesters at Perth Hotel. To change minds, we must listen to those ignored by mainstream politics. Well, that's fair enough. I take issue with a couple of points that he made here, though. He goes, he asked somebody at the Perth demo, which was on Saturday, he said, what would you do if you were in Afghanistan and you had a pretty terrible life and you wanted to get a better life, so you traveled 5,000 miles to get into Britain? Now, I don't think that question is really said in good faith, because what that person is trying to do is to get, say he asked me, what he's trying to do is to get me to say, oh yes, if I was in his shoes, I'd do the same thing. And thereby to try to suggest that I'm hypocritical for wanting to keep him out. That's where that question is intended to go. So I thought about this today, and how would I answer that? And I would answer it this way. I'd say there's no contradiction in believing that one might, to the extent that one can imagine standing in someone else's shoes, there's no contradiction in believing that one might want to come to the UK, say from Afghanistan, but also believing that people in the UK have the right to deny such people entry or to send them home. You know, we can imagine that somebody would want to come here for his own reasons, but we've also got our reasons to keep them out. So just because he might have a good reason, we've still got a good reason to keep him out. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with him. I've got to look at my long-term interests as well. I have to put myself in my own shoes for a change. I have to consider my interests. I don't have the luxury of putting myself in other people's shoes. And most of us do not have the luxury of putting ourselves in other people's shoes. And I know of this person who wrote this, and I know the sort of mentality that these folk have. And so his solution, right, wait for this, his solution, he says, if Western governments insist on reducing immigration, there is only one way to achieve that. Unless and until there is a colossal transfer of wealth from the richest to the poorest parts of the world, people will always immigrate in vast numbers. So that's his solution, a colossal transfer of wealth from here to there, as if that's going to stop it. And, you know, he's not thinking this through, because here he says, many of those gathering in the local park before marching to the Radisson Hotel had local accents and were clearly from some of the poorer parts of Perth. Okay, so these are, to use the vernacular, poor people. And he's saying that the answer to immigration is to transfer the wealth of these people to Afghanistan. These people don't have wealth. We don't have wealth to transfer. So that really gets me when they come up with that. It's like, let's all care about the poor people in Afghanistan, but what about the poor people in Perth? They have got a right. They have got a right as well, not just to be heard, which at least he's giving them some sort of publicity there, but also to be respected, and their political desires should also be met. And the answer is not impoverishing them even more in order to send endless funds to some third world country. Complete baloney. Complete baloney. Now, there are ways that you can help third world countries. We can look at the debt system. We can see the extent to which these countries are unnecessarily caught into the debt trap. We can look at freeing them from that to the extent that it's possible. We can look at trade to the extent that there's things to trade. We can look at helping them through developmental aid and stuff like that. We can also look at not bombing them. That would be a good idea as well. You know, I think the best thing we could have done for Afghanistan is not to bomb it. I think that would have also helped. The best thing we can do for Iran is certainly not to start a bloody war with it, or we will get hundreds of thousands of people coming into Europe as a consequence of that. So, you know, some of these left-leaning people, they do have a point, but they don't go the full way, which is, our country is a sovereign nation and it's got a perfect right to defend its own borders and to keep whoever it wants out and to send whoever it wants back. And as I always say, we can do that democratically and we can do that fairly. Folks, if you've agreed with this message, if you've agreed with the message tonight, we do need everybody that can to show up at our Enough is Enough rally, which is going to be on Saturday, the 6th of September from 12 for a 12:30 start. Protect our country, protect our kids, fairness in housing, homes for Scots, stop the boats, asylum, frauds out, and please bring British Isles flags only. Okay. And the reason I'm saying British Isles flags only is because if you turn up with a flag of a Middle Eastern country pushing war, a war which will only increase more asylum seekers to our country, you need to go. We don't want anything to do with you. Okay, so do not bring any Israel flags. We're very clear about that. If you love conflict, go over there and fight for them. But do not bring your flags to our rally. This is a British rally for the British people. It's been a good show tonight. Budgie Burgers talks about the girl. No idea that she would go down in history. Well, it certainly appears that she has gone down in history. Three imaginary boys. Says, everyone get to Hollywood Saturday the 6th and join a Force for Good and the We Say It podcast. Good point, mankind. Christopher thinks the questioning of Nigel by Scottish journalists today was absolutely dreadful, banal, certainly banal. Some of it was indeed aggressive. They're going to get a big shock, I think, next May. Absolutely, we need to raise the conditions that will allow and encourage British people to raise families. I read this today in the Scottish Daily Mail. This is incredible. Scotland's birth rate plummets to lowest levels since records began. And here's something I could not get my head around. It says, last year, only 2.4% of births were to mothers in their 20s. Last year, only 2.4% of births were to mothers in their 20s. That's like less than 1 in 3 babies in Scotland are born to mothers in their 20s. That's astonishing. So where are the rest? When are the rest being born? It says more than a third were to women aged between 30 and 34. So we have to presume that, well, obviously the rest are to teenage mothers and to women over 34. But that's ridiculous, and that also speaks, I think, to the problems that we're facing in our country, especially with the economic system and the extent to which families are finding it hard. And like the thing with like white European people is we tend to be very careful about reproducing, and like we only like reproduce. We tend to just reproduce very carefully, as it were, whereas other cultures, they don't believe in contraception or anything like that, which is maybe the right way to go, you know. Maybe the Catholic opposition to contraception is correct. I don't know. I'm not making a judgment on that. But other cultures just have lots of children and they don't care about restricting it in the way that white Europeans do. But anyway, we need to get that sorted out. What does this button do? Says devolution needs reversed. Mel Gibson made that girl in Dundee unsafe with his freedom claims. Well, absolutely. They need to go home and make their own country great again, says Catherine. Well, folks, thank you to all our supporters this evening. We're going to be back next week. We'll have a guest next week, and it will be just 2 or 3 days before our event on the 6th of September. And so please hope to see you there. And in the meantime, it just remains for me to say thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again next week. God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next time.